Part 1, the blow that changed everything. And never imagined that a single evening could rewrite her entire life. She had spent years loving quietly, giving gently, believing that if two people walked the same road long enough, love would naturally deepen. But that night, standing on the cracked pavement outside a small cafe where she once dreamed about the future, everything collapsed with one sentence. Simple. Sharp and merciless. And I can't stay with someone who has nothing to offer. I need a future. You can't give me that. She froze for a moment. She thought she had misheard him. The noise of the street blurred behind her. People walked by. Lights flickered. A motorbike roared past, but her world went silent. She looked at the man she had loved for 3 years. The man who used to hold her hands like they were made of something precious, and now those same hands were tucked into his pockets, as if even touching her would make him smaller. Her chest tightened, not because he was leaving, but because of what the goodbye meant. He wasn't rejecting the relationship. He wasn't rejecting the memories. He was rejecting her, the girl who grew up poor, who worked extra shifts to pay rent, who dared to dream of becoming a designer, even when everyone said it was unrealistic. In that moment, poverty didn't feel like a circumstance. It felt like a curse stamped on her forehead. She wanted to fight back, to ask him whether love only mattered when it came wrapped in money, but the words refused to leave her mouth. Instead, she watched him walk away without looking back, as if she were just a chapter he could close without emotion. The pain hit her before she could breathe. It rushed through her like a wave, hot and humiliating. She sank onto the cold curb, hugging her knees, trying to keep herself from falling apart. People passed without noticing the girl who was quietly breaking under the streetlights. Inside her mind, a single question echoed again and again. Am I really worth so little? Tears blurred her vision. She pressed her palms against her face, trying to silence the storm inside. She had always known she wasn't wealthy, but she never imagined her worth would be measured by the size of her wallet. And now, the man she trusted most had confirmed her deepest fear that maybe she was not enough. She walked home that night with trembling steps, carrying a heartbreak that seemed heavier than her entire life. In her small rented room, she lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling. All she could hear were his words replaying in her mind, cutting deeper each time. But beneath the pain, something else stirred, a question she wasn't ready to answer yet, but one that would soon change everything. What if the problem isn't that I have nothing, but that I stopped believing I could become something? Part 2, pain becomes the spark. For days after the breakup, and moved through life like a ghost wearing her own body. She went to work. She smiled when customers walked in. She responded when her manager called her name, but inside, she was hollow, as if someone had scooped out her sense of self and left only echoes behind. Heartbreak wasn't new to the world, but this kind of heartbreak, the kind that shatters your dignity, not just your feelings, had a different weight. Nights were the worst. When the noise of the city faded and the room grew quiet, the silence pressed against her like a hand on her chest. She replayed his words over and over again, each repetition cutting a little deeper. I can't stay with someone who has nothing to offer. It wasn't anger that consumed her, it was shame. Shame for not being enough. Shame for being looked at as a burden. Shame for believing love could exist without conditions. One night, after crying until exhaustion silenced her tears, she reached for an old box she kept under her bed. Inside were sketches worn, crumpled, some stained by spilled coffee, others unfinished. Dresses, shirts, silhouettes, textures, lines that curved with emotion, designs that came from a place in her heart untouched by money, status, or fear. She had drawn them during high school, during breaks at her cafe job, during moments when hope felt possible. As she flipped through them, something inside her shifted small, fragile, but unmistakably alive. This was who she used to be. Before life convinced her she wasn't allowed to dream. Before people told her to be realistic. Before she fell in love with someone who saw her circumstances but not her potential. Her fingers lingered on a sketch of a flowing white dress, one she drew years ago while watching models on an old TV. She'd imagined herself designing collections, creating beauty that lived beyond fabric, telling stories through seams and patterns. She remembered how her teachers used to praise her creativity. She remembered how her friends used to say, "Anne, you were born to design." So when did she stop believing them? As she looked at the drawings, she realized something painful but powerful. She hadn't been fighting for her dream because somewhere along the line, She had accepted the world's low expectations of her. She had dimmed her own light before anyone else did. She held the sketchbook against her chest, and in that vulnerable moment, a new kind of heartbreak rose. Not for the man who left, but for the girl she abandoned inside herself. The girl who believed in creating beauty. The girl who wanted more from life. The girl who wasn't ashamed of her dreams. Tears streamed again. But this time they weren't from weakness. They were from recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that she had betrayed herself far more deeply than anyone else ever could. And then a single thought emerged, clear as dawn. If he thinks I have nothing, then I will build something so undeniable that even he would never have the courage to look me in the eye again. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't pride. It was reclamation, a decision to no longer live quietly in corners, waiting to be chosen or validated. The next morning, she woke up differently. Not strong, not healed, but awakened. Pain had burned away the illusions she once clung to. Pain had forced her to confront who she really was beneath the layers of fear. She opened her old laptop slow, cracked at the hinge, and searched for how to learn fashion design without money. She spent hours watching free tutorials, scribbling notes, practicing drawings. She studied color theory, fabric types, stitching basics, software tutorials. Every night she sat at her small wooden desk, leaning toward the screen with determined eyes, letting the glow of possibility guide her. During the day, she picked up more shifts at the cafe. She saved every tip, every extra coin, sacrificing small comforts for the larger dream. She walked past store windows, not with envy anymore, but with curiosity, analyzing patterns, silhouettes, lines, seeing the world not as a spectator, but as a designer in training. It wasn't easy. Some days exhaustion wrapped around her like chains. Some nights she questioned if she was chasing a fantasy, but each time doubt whispered. She remembered that broken night on the sidewalk, the way she felt powerless, dismissed, invisible, and she vowed never to let herself feel that way again. Pain had become her spark, and soon it would become her fuel. Part 3, the bold decision to begin from zero. There comes a moment in every turning point where a person has to choose, remain who they were, or step into who they could become. For Anne, that moment arrived quietly, not with a dramatic revelation, not with heroic music playing in the background, but in the simple act of sitting at her desk one rainy evening, staring at her reflection on the dark laptop screen. She saw a girl with tired eyes, but there was something different now, a faint determination, a pulse of fire she thought she had lost years ago. She whispered to herself, "If I'm starting from zero, then I'll build from zero." It was the first promise she made to herself and the first one she intended to keep. The next day, Anna made a bold decision. She would pursue fashion design seriously, not as a hobby, not as a distant dream, but as her path. The reality was harsh. She had no formal training, no money for expensive courses, and no connections in the industry. But she had something even more powerful, hunger, a fierce, quiet hunger to become something more than the girl who was left on a sidewalk and told she had nothing to offer. She began by restructuring her life piece by piece. She cut unnecessary expenses. No more bubble tea, no impulsive snacks, no new clothes. Every coin she saved went into a small glass jar, her dream fund. At first, it was only enough to buy simple sketch pens, a cheap ruler, a notebook. But it was a start, and beginnings, she learned, don't need to be grand, they just need to be real. During the day, she worked double shifts at the cafe. In the early mornings, while the city was still stretching awake, she wiped tables, brewed coffee, and swept the floor before customers arrived. She memorized the rhythm of steaming milk, not because she loved the work, but because every hour meant another step toward her future. At night, when her coworkers went home, she stayed behind to sketch designs on napkins or practice sewing small pieces of scrap fabric she collected from a local tailor shop. Her body was tired, but her spirit felt alive for the first time in years. She bought an old second-hand sewing machine. It rattled, the pedal stuck sometimes, and the thread jammed almost daily. But in the quiet of her small room, she learned how to make the machine obey her. She practiced the basics until her fingers hurt. Straight stitches, curved stitches, hems, seams. Small victories became fuel. The first time she completed a clean seam, she smiled through tears because it felt like proof that she wasn't hopeless, proof that she was capable of learning, proof that growth happens in the smallest moments. But starting from zero also meant confronting her fears. Fear of failure, fear of being laughed at, fear that her dream was just a beautiful illusion she wasn't meant to touch. Some nights, doubt returned like a shadow sitting at the edge of her bed. It whispered, "Who are you kidding? You're poor, you're untrained, you're nobody." But she would reach for her sketchbook, the one thing that felt like truth, and flip through the pages. The drawings reminded her of who she was before the world taught her to shrink. They reminded her of the little girl who stayed up past midnight just to draw a dress she imagined. They reminded her that dreams don't disappear, they wait. The turning point came when she created her first full design, a simple beige dress with soft folds and clean lines. She stayed awake until dawn sewing it, her hands trembling from exhaustion, but her heart beating with purpose. When she finished, she held it up in front of her window, letting the morning light fall across the fabric. It wasn't perfect, the hem was uneven, the neckline slightly off, but it was hers. Her creation, her beginning, and in that moment, she realized something powerful. She didn't need to be great yet. She just needed to begin, and starting from zero wasn't a punishment. It was freedom. It meant she could build her future with her own hands, stitch by stitch, decision by decision. It meant she was no longer defined by what she lacked, but by what she was willing to create, and wasn't chasing validation anymore. She wasn't chasing love. She wasn't chasing the past. She was chasing herself, the woman she knew she could become. Part 4, the first failures that tested her. The world has a way of testing people the moment they dare to rise. For Anne, those tests came quickly, disguised as silence, rejection, and humiliation. She had hoped that once she found her direction, the universe would open its doors gently. Instead, it slammed them shut one by one, not to punish her, but to see how badly she truly wanted the life she claimed. Her first goal was simple: get someone to notice her designs. Just one person, one opportunity. She created a small portfolio by photographing the beige dress and a few other pieces she had sewn from leftover fabric. She edited the pictures on her old laptop, adjusting the lighting, cropping out the clutter of her tiny room. When she finished, she looked at her work with a mixture of pride and fear, pride that these designs came from her own hands, and fear that they might not be enough. She sent her portfolio to 10 local shops. The next morning, she checked her email before work. Nothing. By the third day, she refreshed her inbox every hour. Still nothing. A week passed. Silence, the most painful form of rejection. It wasn't just that no one responded. It was that she felt invisible, like she didn't even deserve a no. She wondered if the shop owners saw her name, recognized her unprofessional email address, and simply dismissed her as a naive girl trying to play designer. But she didn't give up. She expanded her reach, sending her designs to bigger brands, online boutiques, and fashion studios. She wrote carefully worded messages, introducing herself with humility, but the only replies she received were automated emails thanking her for her interest and directing her to check the company website for future openings, a polite way of saying they weren't interested. Each rejection was a sting, but not as painful as the doubts that followed. What if I'm not talented enough? What if my designs are too simple? What if he was right? I really have nothing to offer. There were days she didn't sew at all. Days when she stared at her blank sketchbook and wondered if she was building a dream or chasing an illusion. But each time doubt tried to pull her back into the dark. Something softer but stronger inside pushed her forward. The memory of the girl who once believed she could shape beauty with her hands. So she kept going. When emails failed, she tried approaching shops in person. She walked from store to store one Saturday morning, portfolio in hand, heart pounding each time she stepped through a new door. Most shop owners were polite but uninterested. A few barely looked at her sketches before shaking their heads. One woman, a middle-aged shop manager, glanced at her designs for 3 seconds before saying, "We don't take student-level work." The words cut sharply, not because she meant to hurt Anne, but because some truths sting even when they aren't true. By afternoon, Anne found herself sitting on a bench outside a busy street, portfolio clutched against her chest, tears threatening to spill. She felt small, again, the same kind of smallness she felt the night she was left on the sidewalk. The same voice whispered, "Maybe you're not enough." But another voice, a new one, born from nights of perseverance, whispered back, "If you stop now, you will never know how far you could have gone." She wiped her tears and stood up. Failure wasn't the enemy. Quitting was. From that day forward, she treated every rejection like a teacher. Instead of taking the silence personally, she studied successful designers online to see what her work lacked. She practiced new techniques, experimented with bolder lines, refined her understanding of proportions. Her sketches grew cleaner. Her designs grew more confident. She wasn't improving quickly, but she was improving undeniably. And slowly, her failures began to transform, not into success, not yet, but into direction. Each no sharpened her ability. Each silence strengthened her resilience. Each closed door forced her to build her own. And though the world still didn't see her, she was beginning, finally, to see herself. Part 5, the turning point. When persistence finally opened a door, breakthroughs rarely arrive wrapped in fireworks. More often, they slip quietly into life on ordinary days. And for Anne, it came on a morning when she almost didn't check her email. After weeks of silence, rejections, and invisible effort, she had begun to lower her expectations. She still worked, still sketched. I still learned, but she no longer woke up hoping for miracles. She woke up determined, but emotionally numb, as if she'd trained herself not to feel disappointment anymore. But that morning, as she sipped instant coffee before her shift, she opened her email out of habit. A subject line caught her eye. Your portfolio submission, let's talk for a second. She thought it was spam. Her heart beat too fast for her to breathe. She clicked the message, and the world seemed to slow down. It was from a small local clothing shop called Luna Streetwear, a place she had admired from afar but never dared to enter because she felt too ordinary to fit the aesthetic. The owner wrote, "Your designs show emotion, not just technique emotion. That is rare. I'd like to meet you. Come by the shop this afternoon." And reread the message 3 times, her hands shaking. Someone had finally seen her, not perfectly, not fully, but enough to open a door. She felt something bloom inside her chest, something gentle yet powerful. Validation, hope, possibility. She spent the entire bus ride to the shop rehearsing what she would say, but when she arrived, her nerves dissolved the moment she stepped inside. The shop smelled faintly of fabric and coffee. Racks of minimalist designs hung neatly along the walls. Behind the counter stood a man in his 40s with warm eyes and a relaxed posture. "You must be Anne," he said, smiling. "I'm Min." He didn't judge her worn shoes or inexpensive clothes. He didn't rush through her portfolio. Instead, he listened, truly listened, as she explained her inspirations, her process, her struggles with learning from free resources. He asked thoughtful questions about her sketches, pointing out details she didn't even know she had intentionally created. Then he said something she never expected to hear. "You have a designer's soul. Skill can be trained. Soul cannot. I want to give you a chance." Her breath caught. A chance doing what freelance designs for my next capsule collection. Just a few pieces. If they do well, we'll talk about more. It wasn't a promise of fame. It wasn't a full-time job. It wasn't even well paid. But it was real. It was earned. It was hers. For the first time, she felt the world shift beneath her feet, not because someone saved her, but because someone recognized the value she had been fighting so hard to prove. She spent the next 2 weeks working on the designs. She sketched during lunch breaks, sewed samples late into the night, refined details with a level of focus she didn't know she was capable of. When she finally delivered the pieces to Min, anxiety gripped her stomach. She expected criticism, revisions, doubt. Instead, he said softly, "These are good, and really good." He selected one of her designs, a simple oversized hoodie with subtle embroidered detailing to release first. Anne didn't expect much. She thought maybe it would sell a handful of pieces, unnoticed in the vast ocean of fashion. But life is strange. Within days of posting the hoodie online, people began sharing it. A local influencer wore it in a casual photo that went viral. Comments flooded in. "Where did you get this? This design feels so fresh." Is this from a new designer? The shop's website received a surge of orders. Min sent her a message with a single line. "Your design just sold out," and sat on her bed, staring at the screen as tears slipped down her cheeks. Not tears of pain this time, but of release. Every rejection, every silent email, every night she worked until her fingers cramped. All of it suddenly made sense. None of it had been wasted. Her name wasn't famous. Her income hadn't changed overnight, but her life had taken a new shape, a shape she had carved with persistence, discipline, and faith. A single door had opened, and through it, and saw a world where her dreams were no longer impossible, just waiting. Part 6, rising into her own light, building her own brand. Success rarely announces itself with trumpets. Sometimes it comes quietly as a shift in identity, a moment when you realize you're no longer who you used to be. For Anne, that moment arrived the day she stood in front of her mirror and saw not a girl trying to prove herself, but a designer with a voice, a vision, and a future of her own making. The viral hoodie changed more than her income. It changed her belief in what was possible. Orders kept coming. Min offered her more projects, and people began asking for the name behind the design. Each time Min proudly replied, "It's from a young designer named Anne." Something inside her expanded, not loudly, not arrogantly, but steadily, like a seed finally breaking through the soil after years underground. But as her work gained attention, she felt a quiet calling rising beneath the excitement. It was the whisper of a dream she had carried since childhood. One day, you'll have your own brand. At first, the thought terrified her. Having her own brand was a world entirely separate from doing freelance work. It meant responsibility, creativity, leadership, risk, all resting on her shoulders. A younger version of herself would have run from that kind of dream, convinced it belonged to someone wealthier, more talented, more connected. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She began small. She created an Instagram page using her full name, posted her sketches, shared snippets of her process, the messy threads, the late-night desk scattered with fabric scraps, the tiny victories only creators understand. She wasn't polished or strategic yet, but her raw honesty attracted people. Followers grew slowly but authentically. They admired not just her designs, but her resilience. One evening, after delivering a set of designs to Min, he surprised her with a simple question. "Why not start your own line? And you have the vision." She stared at him, shocked. You really think I'm ready?" He smiled gently. "Being ready isn't the point. Being willing is." Those words settled into her heart like a seed catching light. So she began planning. She researched fabrics and suppliers, watched tutorials about branding, and studied how small fashion startups survived their first year. She designed a small capsule collection, just 5 pieces each, reflecting a part of her journey. Clean silhouettes, symbolizing clarity. Soft textures representing vulnerability. Subtle lines that echoed the quiet strength she found within herself. Then came the practical challenges. She didn't have capital. She didn't know where to manufacture. She had no marketing team. But she had persistence, the same persistence that carried her through sleepless nights and endless rejections. She saved aggressively, putting every freelance payment into a separate account. She negotiated small batch production with a local workshop. She built her website alone, teaching herself how to code, small adjustments and design layouts. Every step was imperfect, messy, slow, but undeniably hers. Finally, the day came. Her brand launched. The moment she pressed publish, she felt a mixture of exhilaration and terror. She expected silence. She braced herself for disappointment. She told herself she was prepared for failure, but she wasn't prepared for what actually happened. Within an hour, orders trickled in. People commented on her posts, praising the softness of the colors, the emotional storytelling behind each design, the authenticity of the brand. By evening, 2 pieces were sold out. By midnight, the entire collection had only a handful of items left. Anne sat on her bed, hands trembling, overwhelmed by the realization that she had built something real, not from luck, not from privilege, but from perseverance, passion, and years of fighting self-doubt. Word spread. Small influencers reached out to collaborate. Customers posted pictures of themselves wearing her designs with captions like, "This feels like hope stitched into fabric." And for the first time in her life, and felt seen not as the girl someone left because she was nothing, but as a woman who turned nothing into something beautiful. Building her brand didn't make her arrogant. It made her humble because she now understood the truth. Success isn't about rising above others. It's about rising above who you used to be. And Anne had risen quietly, steadily, gloriously into her own light. Part 7, the confrontation. When the past meets the woman she became, life has a quiet way of circling back, not to reopen wounds, but to show how much you've grown beyond them. For Anne, that moment arrived on a soft afternoon when the city buzzed with weekend laughter, and her phone lit up with a message from a number she hadn't seen in over a year. "Anne, is this still your number?" Her breath paused. His name appeared beneath the message, the man who once told her she had nothing to offer, the man who walked away without a second glance. the man who unknowingly pushed her into the fire that forged her transformation. For a long moment, she simply stared at the screen, not angry, not excited, just aware, the version of herself who once cried on sidewalks, who questioned her worth, who begged the universe to make her enough. That girl felt distant now, like a memory gently fading. Still, something inside her trembled, not from pain, but from recognition of how far she had come. He sent another message. I saw your designs on Instagram. You're doing really well. Can we meet? She didn't owe him anything, not an explanation, not a conversation, not closure. Yet she felt a strange calm urging her to face him, not for his sake, but for her own. Sometimes healing isn't complete until you see the person who broke you and realize they no longer have the power to do so. So she agreed to meet at the same cafe where everything once ended. The walk there felt surreal. The city hadn't changed, but she had. She no longer walked with small steps. Her shoulders weren't curved inward. She didn't shrink into the background. She moved through the streets like someone who occupied space with intention. When she arrived, he was already waiting. She recognized him instantly, but something about him seemed smaller, not physically, but energetically. His posture lacked the confidence he once had. His eyes flickered with uncertainty when he saw her. And you look different, he said, standing awkwardly. I am different, she replied gently. They sat. For a moment, silence stretched between them, the same silence that once suffocated her. But today, she wasn't intimidated. She simply observed. He spoke first, his voice unusually soft. I've been following your brand. You're talented, really talented. I didn't realize it back then. She nodded, not as validation, but as acknowledgement that she no longer needed his recognition. I've been wanting to apologize, he said, exhaling sharply. I was stupid. I let insecurity and pressure get to me. I thought choosing someone with money would make my life easier, but it didn't. And seeing what you've become, his voice cracked. I regret everything. And listened, her expression calm. There was a time when she imagined this moment, him coming back, admitting he was wrong, hoping for another chance. But sitting there, she felt nothing of what she once expected. No satisfaction in his regret, no longing, no desire to rewrite the past, only clarity. You didn't break me, she said softly. You just showed me where I had abandoned myself. He swallowed hard. I know, and I'm sorry. Do you think we could ever try again? The question hung in the air. She looked at him, really looked not as the man she loved, but as someone who belonged to a chapter she had outgrown. He was familiar yet foreign, like an old song she no longer resonated with. No, she said, not unkindly, because the woman I am now is not waiting where you left me. His eyes lowered. She didn't gloat. She didn't lecture. She simply stood up, offering him a small, genuine smile. Thank you, she added, for leaving. If you hadn't, I might never have found myself. Then she picked up her bag and walked away, not dramatically, not angrily, but gracefully, the way someone leaves a room they've already outgrown. Outside, the wind felt different, lighter, almost celebratory. For the first time, she truly understood. Sometimes the people who underestimate you are the very ones who help you rise not through support, but through absence. And in that moment, she felt more powerful than she ever had. Part 8, the message, what her journey truly revealed. When Anne walked out of the cafe that day, leaving behind the man who once walked away from her, she felt something shift deep within her, not triumph, not pride, but liberation. It wasn't about proving him wrong. It wasn't about showcasing her success. It was about finally understanding the truth that had been waiting for her to grow enough to grasp it. Worth is not given. Worth is built. For so long, she believed her circumstances defined her. Poverty, rejection, self-doubt, they wrapped around her like invisible chains. She thought being loved depended on being enough in someone else's eyes. But the journey reshaped that belief, piece by piece. The nights she stayed awake sewing, the mornings she woke before dawn to work, the rejections that stung but sharpened her, the single opportunity that blossomed from perseverance, the courage it took to start her own brand. Each moment whispered the same message. You are the source of your own becoming. The world hadn't suddenly become kinder. Doors didn't magically open. Opportunities didn't fall from the sky. What changed was her relationship with herself. Instead of waiting to be chosen, she chose herself. Instead of wishing for validation, she validated her own dreams. Instead of searching for a place to belong, she built one thread by thread. And that is the quiet brilliance of her story. People often think transformation looks like a dramatic rise, a sudden success, a viral breakthrough, a miraculous stroke of luck. But for Anne, transformation looked like persistence, like small, unseen steps taken when no one cared to watch, like tears wiped at midnight after a day of trying and failing, like picking up a needle with trembling hands and refusing to stop. Her journey teaches something powerful. The world may underestimate you, but it cannot stop you if you no longer underestimate yourself. The man who once left her wasn't the villain of her life. He was the catalyst. His absence didn't diminish her. It freed her. It forced her to confront her own reflection and ask, who am I without someone's approval? And the answer, discovered slowly but surely, was this. She was a creator. She was resilient. She was becoming her own light. Today, when people wear her designs, they aren't just wearing fabric, they are wearing the story of a woman who refused to stay small, a woman who turned heartbreak into direction, a woman who built a future from pieces the world once ignored. And perhaps the most beautiful part of her journey is this. She didn't rise to show the world she was worthy. She rose because she finally realized she always had been.